the plate shattered before anyone understood what was happening. 1 second, Ilara Voss was carrying a stack of lunch orders across the black and white floor of Bellwether Diner. The next, her husband had seized her by the arms and dragged her toward the open front door while 20 employees and a room full of customers watched in stunned silence. Gravy streaked the tiles, a coffee cup rolled beneath a booth, and Ilara's knees struck the floor so hard that pain shot through her body. Her husband, Grant Mercer, stood over her in his tailored navy suit, his face red with fury as he announced that she was fired, effective immediately, and forbidden from ever setting foot inside the diner again. Ilara did not scream. She did not fight back. She only looked through the doorway at the brass plaque beside the entrance, the one Grant had passed every morning without ever reading closely, and whispered a question nobody could hear. How long would it take him to discover that the woman he had just humiliated was not merely a waitress, but the secret owner of everything he believed belonged to him? If you believe kindness matters, that dignity should never be mistaken for weakness, and that people deserve a second chance when they are truly willing to change, please like, comment, share this story, and subscribe to Oxley Stories. And tell us where you are watching from, because somewhere in the world, someone may need to hear this story at exactly the same moment you do. For nearly 4 years, everyone at Bellwether Diner had believed Grant ran the place. He approved schedules, signed supplier orders, interviewed new staff, and walked through the dining room each morning with the confidence of a man inspecting his kingdom. He had taken over daily operations after marrying Ilara, who told him only that the previous owner, an elderly widow named Lenora Bellwether, had left the business in the hands of a private family trust. Grant never asked many questions as long as the trust paid the bills, deposited his generous management salary, and allowed him to introduce himself around town as Bellwether's executive director. He liked the title so much that he had it printed on thick business cards with raised silver lettering. What he did not know was that Lenora had not left the diner to some distant corporation. She had left it to Ilara, the quiet young woman she had once found sleeping in the storeroom during a winter storm, hungry, frightened, and too ashamed to ask for help. Ilara had been 19 then, with $63 in her pocket and no one to call. Her mother had died after a long illness, the landlord had changed the locks on their apartment, and the nursing program Ilara hoped to enter had become an impossible dream. Lenora found her curled beneath a flour sack and did not call the police. Instead, she warmed a bowl of soup, placed it in front of her, and waited until the trembling stopped. Ilara began washing dishes the next morning, then learned the register, the grill, the books, and eventually every small rhythm that kept the diner alive. Lenora had no children, and over the next 12 years, the two women became something stronger than employer and employee. They became family. Yet before Lenora died, she made Ilara promise one strange thing: for the first 5 years of ownership, Ilara must remain publicly anonymous and work regular shifts among the staff. Lenora believed power revealed character, but hidden power revealed everyone else's character first. Ilara had agreed, never imagining the person most deeply exposed would be the men she loved. Grant had not always been cruel. When they met, he was a struggling restaurant consultant with worn shoes, ambitious ideas, and a talent for making ordinary dreams sound possible. He admired Ilara's discipline and listened when she spoke about Bellwether's history. During their first year together, he carried coffee to exhausted nurses at the county hospital, fixed a waitress's broken car without accepting payment, and spent one freezing night repairing the diner's heater because he could not bear to send the night staff home without wages. Ilara fell in love with that man. She believed Lenora would have loved him too. When the diner needed a new operations manager, Ilara recommended Grant to the trust's attorney, never revealing that she controlled the trust herself. She wanted to give her husband a chance to build something with his own hands, not simply inherit influence through marriage. For a while, he justified her faith. Sales rose, waste fell, and customers returned. But success did not merely change Grant's circumstances. It slowly changed what he believed he deserved. The first warning came when Grant began correcting employees in front of customers. Then he replaced the staff meal with discounted leftovers, arguing that generosity damaged discipline. He stopped learning new workers' names and referred to them by job titles. When a dishwasher requested a day off to attend his daughter's surgery, Grant denied it because the reservation book looked full. Ilara quietly covered the shift and arranged the day off anyway, but Grant accused her of undermining management. At home, he began speaking to her as though she were another employee. He criticized the diner uniform she wore, complained that her modest wages embarrassed him, and suggested she should be grateful that he allowed her to continue working there. Each time, Ilara almost told him the truth. Each time, she remembered the men he had once been and wondered whether humility might return if life gave him enough time. Instead, his pride continued growing, fed by a secret he did not even know existed. The morning of the firing began with a missing envelope. Bellwether's payroll deposit was short by $12,000, and Grant blamed the accounting clerk, a single mother named Maribel Sosa. Maribel insisted she had submitted the correct amount, but Grant accused her of incompetence and threatened to call the police. Ilara had spent the previous evening reviewing the trust's financial reports and already knew what had happened. Grant had authorized an unauthorized transfer from the diner's reserve account to a marketing company called North Star Hospitality Ventures. The company's registered director was Grant's old college friend, Dorian Pike, a man who had visited the diner 3 times in the previous month and always left through the back office smiling. Ilara did not yet know whether Grant had stolen the money or fallen into a foolish business scheme, but she knew Maribel was innocent. When Grant ordered security to remove her, Ilara stepped between them and stated calmly that the transfer carried his authorization code. That single sentence turned the entire room cold. Grant's expression changed, not into guilt, but fear. He demanded to know how a waitress had accessed private banking records. Ilara answered that Maribel had asked for help understanding the discrepancy, which was only partly true. Grant moved closer and warned her not to interfere. Ilara did not raise her voice. She simply told him that punishing an innocent employee would not erase a signature. Several workers looked toward the office, where a printer tray still held a copy of the transfer request. Grant saw their eyes move and realized the authority he depended on was beginning to fracture. Instead of explaining himself, he chose the one action that would make him feel powerful again. He ripped Ilara's order pad from her apron, accused her of insubordination, and announced that her employment was terminated. When she refused to leave until Maribel's name was cleared, he grabbed her. By the time Ilara fell at the doorway, the entire diner had become silent except for the soft hiss of bacon burning on the grill. Grant expected someone to support him. No one did. Head chef Tomas Wren stood frozen with a metal spatula in his hand, his face drained of color. Maribel began crying. A young server named Pippa Lane covered her mouth, while 2 customers reached for their phones. Grant ordered everyone back to work, but his voice no longer sounded commanding. It sounded desperate. Ilara slowly rose, blood darkening one knee of her uniform. She looked at the faces around her, not seeking pity, but memorizing who was afraid and who was ashamed. Then she removed her apron, folded it carefully, and placed it on the nearest stool. Before stepping outside, she turned to Grant and told him that by sunset, he would finally learn what Bellwether Diner truly belonged to. He laughed because he thought humiliation had made her delusional. Yet behind him, the brass plaque beside the entrance reflected the name of the Bellwether Family Trust, and beneath it, in letters too small for his pride to notice, was the name of its sole trustee, Ilara Voss. Grant did not read the plaque. He marched into the office and locked the door, while Ilara crossed the street with one shoe scraping against the pavement. The sidewalk burned beneath the afternoon sun, but she barely felt it. For years, she had protected Grant from the consequences of his temper. She had corrected accounting errors before auditors saw them, persuaded suppliers not to cancel contracts after his rude calls, and quietly covered bonuses he promised without checking the budget. She had mistaken protection for loyalty, when in truth she had been hiding him from himself. As she sat on a bench and pressed a napkin against her bleeding knee, her phone began filling with messages from the staff. Some asked if she was safe. Others apologized for doing nothing. One message came from Tomas, who wrote that Grant was shredding documents in the office. Ilara's heartbreak vanished beneath a colder realization. The firing had not only exposed her marriage. It might have uncovered a crime larger than $12,000. She called Ilian Reeves, the trust attorney who had handled Lenora's estate. Ilian had warned her months earlier that several vendor contracts looked suspicious, but Ilara had refused to assume the worst about her husband. Now she asked him to freeze all discretionary accounts, suspend Grant's authority, and send the independent auditor immediately. Ilian was silent for several seconds before telling her something he had hesitated to reveal. North Star Hospitality Ventures had received not 1 transfer, but 9. Over 18 months, nearly $300,000 had left Bellwether's reserve funds through invoices disguised as renovation costs. The documents carried Grant's approval, but some also carried Ilara's digital signature. She had never seen them. Someone had forged the owner's authorization, which meant Grant either knew who truly owned the diner or had been taking instructions from someone who did. That possibility shook Ilara more than the theft. Grant had always behaved as though the trust were faceless and distant. If he knew she owned the diner, then every insult, every attempt to control her, and every dismissive remark had been part of something deliberate. Yet there was another explanation. Only 3 people knew Ilara's identity: Ilian, Lenora's former accountant, and Sable Rowe, the diner's elderly bookkeeper who had served Bellwether for 37 years. Sable had been absent for 2 weeks after suffering what Grant described as a minor fall at home. Ilara had called several times, but the messages went unanswered. Now she asked Ilian to check on her immediately, because the missing money might not be the most dangerous secret inside Bellwether's walls. Back at the diner, Grant emerged from the office carrying a trash bag full of shredded papers. He told the staff Ilara had experienced an emotional breakdown and that anyone repeating false accusations would be terminated. The threat had worked before, but this time Tomas set down his spatula. He had watched Ilara take double shifts when his wife underwent chemotherapy. He had seen her slip grocery vouchers into the lockers of employees too proud to ask for help. He had also watched Grant become the kind of man who treated mercy as weakness. Tomas informed him that the kitchen would not serve another plate until Maribel was reinstated and Ilara was allowed to return safely. One by one, the servers placed their order pads on the counter. Even the teenage busboy, Kellen Frost, switched off the dishwasher. Grant stared at them in disbelief. He had fired one woman to demonstrate his control, but in less than 10 minutes, the entire diner had stopped moving. Grant threatened to replace them all. Then his phone began ringing. The trust had suspended his company cards. His access to the payroll system vanished. The office computer logged him out. He rushed to the safe, but its digital code no longer worked. For the first time, he understood that someone had acted with authority greater than his own. He called Ilian and demanded an explanation. The attorney told him to remain on the property until an auditor arrived. Grant asked who had authorized the suspension, and Ilian answered with only 2 words: the owner. Grant looked through the front windows and saw Ilara still sitting across the street, her posture quiet, her face pale, her phone pressed to her ear. A memory surfaced from their wedding day, when Lenora's old lawyer had attended without explanation and handed Ilara a sealed envelope. Grant had once asked what it contained. She had said it was a responsibility she hoped never to use against anyone. At last, the impossible truth began forming in his mind. He crossed the street so quickly that a car sounded its horn. Ilara stood before he reached her, not because she feared him, but because she no longer intended to meet him from a position of weakness. Grant demanded to know whether she was the owner. She answered that Bellwether had belonged to her since Lenora's death, and that she had given him management authority because she believed he wanted to build a life beside her, not above her. Grant's anger collapsed into shock. He asked why she had hidden it, but Ilara reminded him that he had never once asked who paid the taxes, who approved the building loan, or who covered the losses during the pandemic. He had accepted invisible support because acknowledging it might have forced him to admit his wife possessed more power than he did. Then she asked the question that mattered more than the diner. Had he stolen the money? Grant denied it so quickly that the denial sounded rehearsed. He claimed Dorian had offered an investment opportunity involving a chain of roadside cafes. According to Grant, North Star's invoices represented consulting work that would eventually bring Bellwether national recognition. Ilara asked why the transfers had been hidden and why her signature appeared on documents she had never approved. Grant insisted Dorian handled the paperwork and must have obtained authorization through the trust office. For one fragile moment, Ilara saw genuine fear in her husband's face. He might have been greedy, arrogant, and reckless without understanding the full scheme. But before she could decide whether to believe him, a black sedan pulled up beside the curb. Dorian Pike stepped out, took one look at Ilara, and smiled as though he had been waiting years for the moment she discovered him. Dorian was not merely Grant's college friend. He was Lenora Bellwether's estranged nephew. 30 years earlier, Lenora had cut ties with Dorian's father after discovering he had embezzled from the diner and blamed an innocent cook. Dorian grew up believing the business had been stolen from his family. He had approached Grant 2 years earlier, pretending to admire his leadership while quietly feeding his resentment. He told Grant the anonymous trust was exploiting him, that the Real owner contributed nothing, and that Bellwether would collapse unless Grant took control. He encouraged the hidden transfers and promised that once North Star held enough of the diner's vendor contracts, Grant could force the trust to sell. What Grant never knew was that Dorian had also forged Ilara's authorization, intending to leave Grant responsible for the fraud once the takeover was complete. Dorian spoke with chilling calm as he revealed enough to frighten Grant but not enough to incriminate himself. He suggested that Ilara had manipulated everyone by pretending to be powerless and warned Grant that she would make him the scapegoat. Then he turned to Ilara and said Lenora had always been sentimental, choosing a homeless stranger over her own blood. The insult landed like a stone, but it also confirmed what Ilara needed to know. Only someone familiar with Lenora's private records could have known the circumstances of her rescue. Before Dorian could leave, Ilian's vehicle arrived with 2 auditors and a police detective. The attorney had found Sable Rowe unconscious but alive in her home, weakened by medication that had been switched without her knowledge. Beside her bed was a flash drive containing copies of every fraudulent invoice and a handwritten note naming Dorian as the men who had pressured her to reveal the trust's ownership. Sable had refused. Her fall had never been accidental. Dorian's composure broke. He stepped toward his car, but Grant blocked him. For months, Grant had imagined Dorian as the only person who truly respected his ambition. Now he understood that every compliment had been bait. Dorian had not chosen him because he was powerful. He had chosen him because his pride made him easy to control. The detective asked both men to remain while the documents were reviewed. Dorian warned Grant that if he spoke, they would both go down. Grant looked across the street at Ilara's torn uniform and bruised arms. He saw the employees gathered inside the diner, watching through the windows. Then he looked at his own hands, the same hands that had dragged his wife across the floor to protect a lie created by another man. The person he had become was suddenly visible to him, and there was nowhere left to hide. Grant confessed that he had approved the transfers, though he claimed he believed they funded expansion. He admitted bypassing standard procedures, hiding invoices, and using Ilara's unattended laptop to send documents to Dorian, never realizing her encrypted owner credentials had been copied. He also admitted that he had suspected Ilara knew more about the trust than she claimed. Instead of asking her, he had allowed resentment to grow because every time she solved a problem he could not, he felt smaller. His confession did not erase what he had done, but it gave the auditors enough information to trace the funds and prevent Dorian from moving the remaining money offshore. Dorian was arrested for fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and suspected involvement in Sable's poisoning. Grant was not taken away that afternoon, but the detective warned him he would face charges for financial misconduct and assault. His empire had lasted until sunset, exactly as Ilara had predicted. When Ilara returned to the diner, the staff parted to let her through. No one applauded. The moment was too painful for celebration. Tomas offered her a clean towel for her knee. Maribel handed back the folded apron Grant had torn away. Pippa apologized for freezing at the doorway, but Ilara told her fear did not make her guilty, staying silent forever would have. Then Ilara stood behind the counter where Lenora had once served her soup and revealed the truth to everyone. She explained that she had remained anonymous to understand the diner from the floor upward and to protect it from becoming a place where titles mattered more than people. She admitted that secrecy had also caused harm. By shielding Grant, she had allowed fear to spread among the staff. Ownership, she realized, was not merely the right to make decisions. It was the duty to stop cruelty before others paid the price. Ilara reinstated Maribel immediately and promised full back pay to anyone whose hours Grant had cut unfairly. She restored the staff meal, established an emergency fund, and announced that major decisions would now be reviewed by an employee council. Yet the most surprising choice came when she refused to fire everyone associated with Grant's management. She knew fear could turn good people into silent witnesses, and she wanted Bellwether to become a place where speaking up did not cost someone their livelihood. Still, compassion did not mean avoiding consequences. Grant's authority was terminated permanently. His name was removed from the office door, his cards were collected, and his access to the building was revoked. The men who had dragged his wife outside now stood on the same sidewalk carrying a cardboard box filled with photographs, business cards, and the silver desk plaque that had once called him executive director. That evening, Ilara returned to the apartment they shared. Grant was sitting in the dark with his packed suitcase beside him. He did not ask forgiveness. Perhaps for the first time in years, he understood that forgiveness could not be demanded like obedience. He told her he had spent so long fearing insignificance that he destroyed the person who had made him feel worthy before he possessed anything. Ilara listened, but she did not comfort him. She said love could survive hardship, failure, and even shame, but it could not survive where dignity was unsafe. She removed her wedding ring and placed it on the table. Grant began to cry, not loudly, not theatrically, but with the broken silence of a man who had finally reached the cost of every small cruelty he had justified. Ilara left the apartment carrying only Lenora's recipe book and the uniform she had washed 1,000 times. The months that followed were not easy. Investigators examined every account. Reporters gathered outside Bellwether after news of the fraud spread. Some customers accused Ilara of deceiving her husband by hiding her ownership, while others treated her like a hero she did not feel she was. The diner lost business, and for several weeks Ilara wondered whether Lenora's legacy would survive the scandal. Then small acts began changing the tide. A retired teacher left a $100 tip with a note thanking Maribel for always remembering his wife's birthday. Hospital workers filled the booths after night shifts. Tomas created a soup named after Lenora, using the same recipe that had saved Ilara from hunger years earlier. Former employees returned to share stories of quiet help Ilara had given them. Bellwether was no longer crowded because people were curious about the scandal. It was crowded because they wanted to support the values Grant had nearly erased. Sable recovered slowly and returned one Sunday morning using a cane. The entire staff stood when she entered, but she waved them down and asked for her usual coffee. She told Ilara that Lenora's hidden ownership condition had never been designed as a test for Grant. It had been designed for Ilara. Lenora worried that sudden wealth might make the frightened girl from the storeroom forget what hunger felt like. Instead, Ilara had spent years carrying plates, cleaning spills, and listening to people others overlooked. Sable said Lenora would have been proud, not because Ilara owned the diner, but because after being humiliated, she had used power to repair rather than punish. Yet Sable also warned her that mercy without boundaries becomes permission. Ilara understood. She could hope Grant changed without allowing him back into the life he had wounded. Grant eventually pleaded guilty to unauthorized financial transfers and assault. Because he cooperated fully, helped recover much of the stolen money, and had no prior record, he received probation, community service, mandatory counseling, and restitution rather than prison. He sold his car and most of his belongings to repay the diner. At first, Ilara suspected these actions were attempts to win her back. But Grant never contacted her directly. Instead, he spent his community service hours at a shelter kitchen across town, washing dishes, scrubbing floors, and serving meals under a supervisor who did not care what title he once held. Months became a year. The shelter director later told Ilara that Grant arrived early, stayed late, and never mentioned Bellwether. He had stopped asking to be seen. On the first anniversary of the firing, Ilara found an envelope beneath the diner door before sunrise. Inside was no apology letter and no request for reconciliation. There was only a cashier's check for the last of the restitution and Grant's old silver business card, cut carefully in half. On the back, he had written that he finally understood why Lenora had hidden ownership. People show their true character when they believe kindness has no power behind it. He admitted he had failed that test long before the day he dragged Ilara outside. He thanked her for not protecting him from the consequences anymore. Ilara stood alone in the quiet diner, holding the card as morning light spread across the tiled floor. She cried for the husband she had lost, for the men he might have become, and for the part of herself that had believed loving someone meant endlessly absorbing their harm. She did not take Grant back. Some wounds heal into wisdom, not reunion. But several years later, when Bellwether opened a second location beside the shelter, Ilara invited its kitchen program to train people rebuilding their lives after addiction, homelessness, and incarceration. Grant was not placed in charge. He began where Ilara had begun, washing dishes in the back, earning trust one ordinary day at a time. They spoke only occasionally, always with respectful distance. He never again called the diner his, and Ilara never used her ownership to humiliate him. Their marriage remained over, but the story of their lives did not end with revenge. It continued through accountability, changed behavior, and the difficult truth that second chances do not always restore what was lost. Sometimes they create something humbler, safer, and more honest in its place. Years after Lenora had found Elara hungry in the storeroom, another young woman appeared behind Bellwether during a winter storm, soaked from the rain and clutching a torn backpack. Elara brought her inside, warmed a bowl of Lenora's soup, and sat nearby without asking questions. On the wall above them hung a small framed plaque that did not display the owner's name. Instead, it carried a simple promise: no person who enters this diner will be made small so someone else can feel powerful. The young woman lifted the spoon with trembling hands, unaware that the person cleaning the table beside her owned the entire building. And that was exactly how Elara wanted it. If this story touched your heart, reminded you of your own worth, or made you think of someone who once showed kindness when you needed it most, please support this video by liking it, sharing it, and subscribing to Oxley Stories. Your engagement helps stories about dignity, courage, accountability, and second chances reach people who may be struggling in silence. Please comment, what would you have done if you were Elara, revealed the truth sooner, or waited until Grant exposed his true character? Because in the end, Grant lost the diner the moment he believed authority gave him permission to destroy another person's dignity. Elara kept it because she understood what Lenora had tried to teach her all along: ownership is not proven by the name on a document, the title on a door, or the power to fire someone in front of a crowd. True ownership is shown by what you protect when no one knows the power is yours, and by how gently you treat people when you believe they have none.